The heat was a physical presence, a smothering blanket woven from asphalt fumes and indifference. It settled over the cracked tarmac of the Black Creek gas and sip, baking the dust into a fine, gritty powder that coated everything, including the inside of Leo's lungs. At 17, he felt 1,000 years old. His life measured in the rhythmic squeak of the mop bucket's wheels and the monotonous chime of the bell above the door. He was a ghost in his own existence, a thin, stooped figure in a faded blue uniform, perpetually overlooked. The world saw a boy going nowhere, and on days like this, when the sun beat down with personal malice, Leo was inclined to agree. His universe had shrunk to this desolate outpost on a forgotten highway, a purgatory of lukewarm coffee and condescending glances. He was hunched over a puddle of spilled soda, the sticky sweet smell clinging to the humid air, when the bell chimed with a familiar, unwelcome arrogance. Trent's laughter preceded him, a sharp, barking sound that grated on Leo's nerves. He and his two shadows, Kyle and Mark, swaggered in, their expensive sneakers silent on the linoleum Leo had just cleaned. They moved with the unearned confidence of teenage royalty. Their town, their rules. Trent, with his perfectly coiffed hair and a smile that never reached his eyes, was the crown prince of this small-town dynasty, his father's real estate empire casting a long shadow over everything, including Leo's miserable job. "Look at him, guys," Trent announced, his voice echoing in the empty store. "Still scrubbing floors. Big plans for the future, Leo?" Leo didn't look up. He just kept wiping the rag, making slow, deliberate circles. A response was fuel. Silence was a shield, however thin. He could feel their eyes on him, the collective weight of their judgment pressing down. They were a portrait of privilege. Clean, well-fed, their futures as bright and guaranteed as the sunrise. He was their opposite, a study in frayed edges and quiet desperation. Mark nudged a pyramid of motor oil cans with his foot, watching them wobble. "Careful, man," Kyle snickered. "You might make him have to do some actual work." The humiliation was a constant, a low-grade fever that never broke. It wasn't just the words. It was the way they took up space, the way they treated him as part of the scenery, something to be defaced for a moment's amusement. Trent sauntered to the counter, pulling a crisp $50 bill from his wallet. He wanted a pack of gum. Leo finally stood, his back aching, and walked behind the register. He rang up the 99-cent purchase, his fingers fumbling slightly under Trent's smug gaze. He placed the change on the counter. Trent looked at the pile of coins and bills, then back at Leo, a slow, contemptuous smile spreading across his face. He carefully picked up the pack of gum, leaving the money untouched. "Keep the change, buddy," he said, his voice dripping with faux generosity. "Looks like you need it more than I do." With a final, dismissive glance, they turned and walked out, their laughter trailing behind them like exhaust fumes, leaving Leo standing in a silence that was louder and more painful than their taunts. The $50 felt like an anchor, pulling him deeper into the hopeless, shimmering heat. The conflict was a ritual, as predictable as the setting sun. Trent and his cronies treated the gas and sip like their personal clubhouse, and Leo was their designated jester. This time, they returned with a vengeance, their laughter sharper, their cruelty more refined. Trent's polished black truck, a graduation gift that cost more than Leo would make in 5 years, screeched to a halt by the pumps, kicking up a cloud of gravel and dust that billowed into the open doorway of the store. Leo was stocking the coolers, the cold air a brief respite. He heard them before he saw them, their voices loud and obnoxious. "Round 2, Trent bellowed, shoving the door open so hard it slammed against the wall, rattling a display of cheap sunglasses. He was holding a giant fountain drink, a monstrous cup of luridly red slush. He took a theatrical sip, grimaced, and looked directly at Leo. "Ugh, this is garbage," he declared to his audience of 2. "Hey, floor scrubber, think fast." Before Leo could react, the cup was airborne. It flew in a lazy arc, trailing droplets of red syrup like a wounded comet, and hit the floor not 3 feet from him. The plastic cup cracked on impact, a tidal wave of sticky, crimson ice spreading across the freshly mopped tiles. The mess was spectacular, a Pollock painting of teenage malice. Kyle and Mark howled with laughter, clutching their sides. Leo stared at the spill, a cold knot tightening in his stomach. He saw the hours of mopping it would take, the stain it would leave on the already yellowed linoleum, the inevitable lecture from his boss, Mr. Henderson. He felt a tremor in his hands, a surge of rage so pure and hot it almost made him dizzy. But he locked it down, burying it deep beneath layers of practiced resignation. He couldn't afford to fight back. He couldn't afford to lose this job. Mr. Henderson, a man whose spine had long ago dissolved in grease and apathy, emerged from the back office, his face a mask of weary irritation. He saw the mess, he saw Trent and his friends laughing, and he saw Leo standing there, fists clenched at his sides. His gaze settled on Leo. "What is going on out here?" he demanded, his voice thin and reedy. "Leo, I leave you alone for 5 minutes and you're making a disaster?" Trent stepped forward, feigning innocence. "It was an accident, Mr. Henderson. I tripped." Leo here startled me, just standing there all creepy-like. Henderson's eyes narrowed, not at Trent, but at Leo. It was easier to blame the boy who wouldn't talk back than the son of the man who owned half the town. "Well, clean it up," Henderson snapped, gesturing at the Red Sea with a dismissive wave of his hand. "And it's coming out of your pay. That's product, son." The injustice of it was a physical blow. Leo's silence was mistaken for guilt, his stillness for insubordination. He was being punished for the crime of being a target. As he retrieved the mop and bucket, the laughter of the boys followed him, a soundtrack to his humiliation. They watched him for a few minutes, their amusement waning, before piling back into their truck and peeling out, leaving him alone with the sticky, crimson stain that felt like a map of his own life. Leo's quiet strength wasn't born of weakness, but of a promise. It was forged in the hushed, sterile quiet of his grandmother's sickroom, in the scent of lavender and rubbing alcohol that clung to their tiny, 2-bedroom apartment. His grandmother, Elena, was his entire world, the last bastion of a family fractured by tragedy. His father, a Marine who spoke more about honor than he did about the war that haunted his eyes, had died in a car accident when Leo was 12. His mother, unable to cope with the loss, had simply drifted away, a ghost long before she physically left. That left Elena, a woman with a spine of steel and a heart full of stories. She had raised him on tales of the old country, of resilience in the face of hardship, and on the simple, unshakable principle her son had lived by: you do the right thing, especially when it's hard. "Dignity, Leonardo," she would whisper, her voice thin as parchment, "is the one thing no one can take from you. They can take your money, your home, your pride. But dignity you must give away. Never give it away." Now her body was failing her, a slow, cruel betrayal that left her confined to her bed. The money from Leo's dead-end job was a lifeline. It paid for the prescriptions that eased her pain, the special food she could keep down, the electricity that kept the small fan turning in the sweltering summer nights. Every insult he swallowed at the gas and sip, every mess he cleaned that wasn't his, every condescending glance he endured, was a transaction. He was trading his pride for her comfort. It was a deal he would make 1,000 times over. He remembered his father, home on a short leave, sitting with him on the porch steps. A neighbor's dog had been hit by a car, and the driver had sped off. His father, without a word, had scooped up the bleeding animal, wrapped it in his own clean uniform jacket, and driven it to the vet, paying the bill himself. Leo had asked him why. "Because it was the right thing to do," his father had said, his voice simple and firm. "You don't need a reason to help something that's hurt. You just do it." That memory was an anchor in the turbulent sea of his adolescence. It was the reason he could stand still while Trent's verbal poison washed over him. He wasn't weak, he was waiting. He was enduring. His strength wasn't in a loud retort or a thrown punch. It was in the quiet click of the door as he got home after a grueling shift, in the gentle way he checked on Elena, In the soft voice he used to read her the evening paper. It was in the careful way he counted out the crumpled bills from his pocket, separating the pharmacy money from the grocery money. This wasn't the life he would have chosen, but it was his. The responsibility was a crushing weight, but it was also a purpose. It gave him a reason to get up, to face the heat, to mop the floors, to absorb the scorn. He was a guardian, a provider, a quiet soldier fighting a war no one else could see. His battlefield was a grimy gas station, and his armor was the love he held for the frail woman sleeping peacefully in the next room, unaware of the daily sacrifices made in her name. This hidden life, this secret well of devotion, was the source of the unyielding dignity that so infuriated boys like Trent, who could never understand a strength they couldn't buy. The pressure began to mount, a slow, systematic strangulation of Leo's already fragile world. Trent, emboldened by the lack of consequences, escalated his campaign from casual torment to deliberate sabotage. It started with a series of negative online reviews for the gas and sip, all posted under fake names, all mentioning a rude, lazy kid who worked the evening shift. Mr. Henderson, whose business acumen began and ended with counting the day's receipts, saw the one-star ratings and immediately blamed Leo. "You're driving away my customers," he'd shrieked, waving his phone in Leo's face. Then came the anonymous call to the county health inspector. The inspector, a portly man with a clipboard and a permanent scowl, found a litany of minor violations. A leaky faucet in the restroom, a box of chips stored too close to the floor, and slapped Henderson with a hefty fine and a warning. Again, the blame fell squarely on Leo. "You're supposed to be keeping this place clean. What do I pay you for?" Henderson had raged, conveniently forgetting that he paid Leo minimum wage to do the work of 3 people. Leo felt the walls closing in. The job, once just a source of humiliation, was now a source of constant anxiety. He started double-checking everything, scrubbing surfaces that were already clean, staying late off the clock to organize the storeroom, all in a desperate attempt to avoid Henderson's wrath. But it was no use. Trent's attacks were relentless. One evening, Leo found the nozzle of the diesel pump jammed into the unleaded fuel tank, a simple act of vandalism that could have caused catastrophic damage if he hadn't noticed. Another night, the air compressor for the tires was mysteriously unplugged and the hose slashed. Each incident was a new wave of fury from Henderson, a new threat to his employment. The community, the few regulars who drifted in and out, were silent witnesses. They saw the black truck peel away. They heard Henderson's tirades. They saw the exhaustion etched onto Leo's face. But they said nothing. They averted their eyes, paid for their gas, and drove away, unwilling to be drawn into the orbit of Trent's casual cruelty. Their silence was a form of complicity, another brick in the wall of isolation being built around him. He was running on fumes, surviving on a few hours of broken sleep a night. The stress was a physical weight, making his shoulders ache and his head throb. He'd lie in bed, staring at the ceiling, the numbers running through his head. The cost of Elena's next prescription refill, the rent that was due in a week, the dwindling balance in his bank account. He was trapped. If he quit, Elena wouldn't get her medicine. If he was fired, it would be even worse. So he endured. He walked into work each day with a knot of dread in his stomach, waiting for the next attack. The pressure was immense, a deep-sea-level crushing force. He felt himself being ground down, his quiet dignity eroding into raw fear. He was just a kid, trying to hold his world together with fraying string and sheer willpower, and he knew with a terrifying certainty that something was about to break. He just prayed that when it did, he wouldn't be the only thing that shattered. The storm broke on a Tuesday night, a furious, biblical deluge that turned the sky to bruised purple and black. Rain came down in solid, wind-driven sheets, hammering against the tin roof of the gas and sip. The highway was a black river, deserted. Leo was alone, the final hours of his shift ticking by in the eerie, storm-wrapped silence. He was wiping down the counter for the 10th time, his thoughts adrift in a sea of worry, when a sound ripped through the thunder's roar. It was a horrifying shriek of tortured metal, followed by a sickening final crump. Leo's head snapped up. He ran to the glass door, peering out into the maelstrom. For a moment, he saw nothing but the churning chaos of the storm. Then, a flash of lightning illuminated the scene, freezing it for a split second like a photograph. 100 yards down the road, a motorcycle was twisted into a grotesque sculpture of chrome and steel, wrapped around a highway sign. A dark shape lay motionless on the wet asphalt beside it. Every instinct screamed at him to stay inside, to call 911 and let the professionals handle it. It was dangerous. It wasn't his problem. But then his father's voice echoed in his mind, clear as day. You don't need a reason to help something that's hurt. He didn't hesitate. Grabbing the store's heavy-duty flashlight and a thin, worn windbreaker, he pushed the door open and plunged into the storm. The wind and rain hit him like a physical blow, stealing his breath. He ran, his sneakers slipping on the slick pavement, the flashlight beam dancing wildly ahead of him. As he got closer, he could see the man, huge and clad in black leather, trying to push himself up. A low groan of agony cut through the wind. The man's leg was bent at an unnatural angle, a shard of bone pressing against the torn leather of his pants. Leo reached him, his heart pounding. The man was enormous, a mountain of muscle and tattoos. A cut on his forehead was bleeding freely, the rain mingling with the blood and tracing red rivulets down his weathered face. On the back of his leather vest, partially obscured by mud, was a patch. A death's head with wings. Hell's angels. A jolt of fear, cold and sharp, shot through Leo. He knew the stories, the reputation. But the man on the ground wasn't a reputation. He was a person, grievously injured and vulnerable. "Hey!" Leo shouted over the storm. "Are you okay? I'm going to help you." The biker's eyes, cloudy with pain, focused on him. A flicker of suspicion, of primal hostility, crossed his face. "Get away from me, kid," he growled, his voice a low rumble of pain. "Don't need." "No cops," Leo understood immediately. "No cops," he promised. "But you can't stay here. You'll bleed out or drown. I can get you to the garage at the station. It's dry." He put the flashlight down and hooked his thin arms under the biker's shoulders. It was like trying to lift a boulder. The man cried out as Leo pulled, the movement jostling his broken leg. "I know it hurts," Leo said, his voice straining. "Just try to work with me," gritting his teeth. Fueled by a surge of adrenaline, Leo dragged the massive man, inch by painful inch, across the asphalt, back towards the distant, welcoming light of the gas station. It was a monumental, selfless act of will against the fury of the storm and the dead weight of a wounded giant. The morning after the storm was unnaturally bright, the air scrubbed clean and the world glistening. The tranquility was a lie. Inside the gas and Sips garage, the scene was one of controlled chaos. The biker, whose name Leo still didn't know, was propped against a stack of old tires, his face pale and tight with pain. His leg was crudely splinted with a tire iron and strips of cloth torn from a box of shop rags. The first aid kit from the store, a small plastic box, lay open and empty. Leo had used the last of his own cash, $27 he'd been saving for Elena's next prescription, to pay Henderson's register for the antiseptic wipes, gauze, and medical tape. He'd covered the biker with his own jacket, the one his father had given him, a threadbare but cherished possession. The man had drifted in and out of consciousness all night, muttering feverishly, but he was alive. The chime of the front door bell sounded like a death knell. Mr. Henderson walked in, took one look at the scene. The muddy tracks on his floor, the disheveled state of the garage, the colossal, unconscious biker, and his face turned a mottled shade of purple. "What in God's name have you done?" he shrieked, his voice cracking. "There's a criminal in my garage. You brought him here? Are you insane? You're fired. Leo, get out. I'm calling the police." Leo stood his ground, placing himself between Henderson and the injured man. "You can't," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "He's hurt." He didn't want cops. Henderson's rage turned to disbelief. "I can't? Watch me. You're finished here." Just as he pulled out his phone, a low, menacing rumble grew outside. A single, blacked-out Harley-Davidson motorcycle pulled up to the garage entrance, its engine idling like a growling predator. The rider dismounted. He was younger than the injured man, but no less intimidating. He wore a leather vest with a prospect patch, his eyes hidden behind dark sunglasses. He moved with a coiled, predatory grace, his gaze sweeping over the scene, taking in every detail. The injured biker, the empty first aid box, the torn rags, Leo's jacket draped over the man's chest, and Leo himself, standing guard. The prospect's eyes, cold and analytical, paused on Leo. He saw not a threat, but a skinny kid who looked like he hadn't slept in a week. He saw the defiant set of his jaw. He looked from Leo to his wounded brother, and a complex series of calculations seemed to happen behind the sunglasses. The initial hostility in his posture softened almost imperceptibly. He didn't see a victim or a perpetrator. He saw a protector. He gave Leo a short, sharp nod, a gesture so fleeting it was almost imaginary, but it was there. It was a sign of acknowledgement, a flicker of respect. Without a word, he and Henderson had a silent standoff until another vehicle, a black van, pulled up. The prospect and the driver efficiently and gently loaded their injured brother inside. The prospect paused before getting in, his eyes meeting Leo's one last time. He then looked at the sputtering, terrified Mr. Henderson. A silent message was passed. Trouble was not welcome. Then they were gone. Leo was left alone in the quiet garage, the smell of rain and ozone still in the air. He had been fired. He had no money for the prescription. He had done the right thing, and in the cold light of day, it had cost him everything. 5 years was a lifetime. The Black Creek Gas and Sip was gone, bulldozed and replaced by a soulless, corporate 24-hour convenience store with fluorescent lights that bleached all the color from the world. Mr. Henderson had taken his money and retired to Florida. Trent, his cruelty undiminished by age, had inherited his father's swagger and his real estate business, becoming a petty tyrant in a nicer suit. And Leo, now 22, was still fighting. His grandmother, Elena, had passed away 2 years prior, a quiet, peaceful end that had left a hole in his life the size of the sky. He'd taken the small inheritance she'd left him and his innate skill with engines, a knack inherited from his father, and opened a small, one-bay auto repair shop on the edge of town. Legacy Garage, the faded sign read. It was more of a shack than a garage, perpetually smelling of oil and hard work. But it was his. It was a struggle. Business was slow, and Trent had made it his personal mission to run him out of town. He wanted the land for a new strip mall. The final confrontation happened on a blistering August afternoon. Trent, flanked by a lawyer in a cheap suit, stood in the dusty lot of Legacy Garage. He held a sheaf of papers, an eviction notice based on a zoning technicality he'd paid someone to discover. "It's over, Leo," Trent said, his voice smooth with triumph. "You have 30 days. My advice? Start packing now. This dump isn't worth fighting for." Leo stood before him, his hands stained with grease, his face weary but his back straight. He said nothing. He had no fight left, no money for a legal battle. This was the end of the line. It was in that moment of absolute defeat, as Trent smirked and the lawyer shuffled his papers, that the sound began. It was a low, distant hum, a vibration felt more than heard. It grew steadily, a deep, guttural rumble that seemed to be coming from the very earth itself. People on the street stopped, looking towards the highway. The hum became a roar, then a thunderous, rolling cataclysm of sound. The windows of the downtown shops began to vibrate. Then they appeared. Over the rise of the highway, a wave of chrome and black leather crested and poured into the town. It was a procession, an army. Dozens, then scores, then what seemed like hundreds of Harley-Davidson motorcycles, moving with the disciplined precision of a cavalry charge. They flooded the main street, a river of steel and menace, their engines a deafening symphony of raw power. The town went silent, all activity frozen. This was not a casual ride. This was an arrival. The column of bikers snaked through the town and turned, with one accord, onto the dusty side street that led to Legacy Garage. They filled the street, blocking it from end to end, an overwhelming force of intimidating presence. They cut their engines one by one, the sudden silence more profound and threatening than the noise had been. In the center of this sea of leather and steel, the lead rider dismounted. He was older now, his face a roadmap of hard miles, a long scar tracing a path from his temple to his jaw. He moved with an unhurried, absolute authority. On his vest, above the familiar death's head emblem, was a patch that read simply, President. He walked past a stunned Trent, his eyes fixed only on Leo. The man, the president, stopped a few feet from Leo. The silence was absolute, the air thick with tension. The entire town seemed to be holding its breath. The biker's eyes, a piercing, pale blue, held a depth of memory that spanned the 5 years since that stormy night. He was the man from the wreck. He was the mountain Leo had dragged to safety. "They call me Reaper," he said, his voice a low gravel, yet it carried in the stillness as if he were speaking to the whole world. He looked Leo up and down, taking in the grease-stained clothes, the weary lines on his young face, the defiant posture. A slow, genuine smile touched the corners of his mouth. "But I believe you knew me when I was just a heap of broken bones in a ditch." He turned, his gaze sweeping over the assembled crowd of bikers, then settling on Trent, who had gone pale, his smug confidence evaporating like a puddle in the sun. Reaper's voice grew louder, imbued with a resonant power that commanded attention. "5 years ago," he began, "I was good as dead on the side of that highway." He pointed a thick, gloved finger towards the road. "A storm that could tear the sky open. My bike was scrap, my leg was in 2 pieces. I was bleeding out in the rain." He paused, letting the image sink in. "Cars drove by. People who lived here, your neighbors, they saw the wreck. And they did nothing." His eyes scanned the faces of the townspeople who had begun to gather at a safe distance, their faces a mixture of fear and curiosity. "Then this kid," Reaper said, his voice softening as he turned back to Leo, "this boy, with nothing to his name, ran out into that hell. He was scared. I was twice his size and half crazy with pain. I told him to get lost. But he didn't." Reaper reached into a saddlebag on his bike and pulled out a folded, faded object. He held it up for all to see. It was a tattered, worn-out windbreaker, the same one Leo had left on him in the garage. "He dragged me by himself to shelter. He used his own money I later found out he was saving for his sick grandmother's medicine, to patch me up. He splinted my leg with a tire iron. And he covered me with his own jacket and stood guard over me all night. A skinny kid protecting a stranger from a world he figured was hostile." He took a step closer to Leo, his expression one of profound, unwavering respect. "He never asked my name. He never asked for a reward. He didn't call the cops because he understood something about honor. He just did the right thing because it was the right thing to do." "The Hells Angels," Reaper's voice boomed, turning to ice as he looked at Trent. "Do not forget, a debt of honor is absolute. This boy saved my life. That makes him family. And this town is about to learn what it means to disrespect our family." The moment the words left Reaper's mouth, the scene erupted into disciplined action. It was not the chaos of a brawl, but the coordinated efficiency of a military operation. The bikers dismounted as one, but they didn't move towards Trent or the stunned lawyer. They descended upon Legacy Garage. They were not a mob. They were a legion of craftsmen. From the back of a large support truck that had pulled up, they unloaded generators, tool chests the size of refrigerators, welding equipment, and stacks of lumber and steel. A biker with Sarge stitched on his vest began barking orders, and the men fell into teams. One group started tearing the rotten wood from the garage's facade. Another began digging trenches for new electrical conduits. The sounds of saws, hammers, and power wrenches filled the air, a symphony of reconstruction. They moved with a shared purpose, their rough, tattooed exteriors belying the skill and precision of their work. Reaper, meanwhile, walked slowly toward Trent. He didn't raise his voice or make a single threatening gesture. His presence was enough. He was a walking monolith of quiet, lethal power, and Trent visibly shrank before him. "You wanted this land," Reaper stated, his voice a low, dangerous hum. "You tried to bully this young man to take what little he had because you thought he was alone. You thought he was weak." He stopped directly in front of Trent, towering over him. "Let me be perfectly clear. Legacy Garage is now under the protection of the Hells Angels Motorcycle Club. This property is not for sale. This business will not be harassed. Leo is not to be touched, spoken to, or even looked at in a way I might find disrespectful." He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a whisper that was more menacing than any shout. "If a single nail in this new building comes loose, if Leo gets so much as a flat tire that he didn't cause himself, I will not send my brothers. I will come back myself. Do you understand me?" Trent, his face ashen, could only manage a series of frantic, jerky nods, his legal papers fluttering from his nerveless fingers to the dusty ground. With Trent dismissed, a mere afterthought, Reaper turned back to the community. He saw the shift in their eyes. The fear was still there, but it was now mingled with awe and a dawning sense of shame. They were seeing Leo for the first time, not as the poor, quiet kid, but as a figure of immense, validated integrity. A few of the town's older residents, mechanics and tradesmen themselves, watched the bikers work with grudging admiration. One of them, a grizzled old plumber named Sal, hesitantly approached Leo. "Kid," he said, clearing his throat, I got some spare copper pipe back at my shop. Looks like they could use it for the new washroom." It was the first crack in the wall of silence. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows, Reaper approached Leo, holding a heavy, brand-new black leather vest. It had no club patches, no claim of membership. But on the back, exquisitely stitched in silver thread, was the image of a single, powerful lion standing guard over a fallen wrench. Below it were two words. The Guardian Reaper handed it to Leo. "This doesn't make you one of us," he said gruffly. "You don't want our life. This just makes sure everyone knows you are one of our own." It was a crown, bestowed not for power or violence, but for courage, dignity, and an unwavering moral compass. The days that followed were a blur of transformation. The ramshackle garage was reborn. The Angels worked from sunup to sundown, their roaring bikes a constant presence on the edge of town, a clear and visible deterrent to any lingering thoughts of trouble. They raised a new structure, solid and clean, with 2 state-of-the-art hydraulic lifts, a fully stocked parts room, and a small, comfortable office. The sign, Legacy Garage, was remade in gleaming, polished chrome. The community, inspired by the bikers' unexpected industry and shamed by their own prior indifference, began to contribute. Sal the plumber installed the new water lines. The owner of the hardware store dropped off boxes of electrical supplies, refusing payment. Mothers from the church brought trays of sandwiches and thermoses of coffee for the workers. They were rebuilding more than a garage. They were mending the fractured spirit of their own town, offering silent apologies to the boy they had allowed to suffer. Leo worked alongside them, his initial shock giving way to a profound sense of belonging. He learned their names. Grizz, a bear of a man who could rebuild a carburetor blindfolded. Doc, a quiet ex-medic who oversaw the structural work. Preacher, who quoted scripture while running wiring. They treated him not as a project, but as a brother. They listened to his ideas about the garage's layout, deferring to his mechanics' expertise. They shared stories and crude jokes over lunch, including him in their circle of easy camaraderie. In the evenings, he would sit with Reaper on the new porch of the office, the two of them sharing a quiet coffee as the sun went down. They didn't talk much. They didn't need to. A bond had been forged in a moment of crisis and tempered in the fires of mutual respect. It was a language of action, not words. On the final day, the garage was finished. It stood as a monument to honor, a pristine and powerful statement on the dusty lot. The bikers gathered, their work done. The entire town seemed to have turned out, standing at a respectful distance, their faces full of a new understanding. Leo stood before them, wearing the heavy leather vest Reaper had given him. Felt less like a piece of clothing and more like a second skin. He was no longer the stooped, invisible boy. He stood tall, his shoulders back, his eyes clear and steady. He was a man who knew his own worth, because it had been seen, validated, and honored by the most unlikely of saviors. Reaper clapped him on the shoulder, a solid, paternal gesture. "It's yours, kid," he said. "You earned it." Then, with a signal, the bikers mounted their Harleys. One by one, the engines roared to life, the sound building into a thunderous chorus. It was no longer a sound of menace. It was a salute. It was the sound of loyalty, of a promise kept, of a debt of honor paid in full. As the last of the taillights disappeared over the horizon, Leo stood alone in the quiet, a faint, genuine smile on his face. He was home. He was protected. He was finally seen.